Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change. And I'm going to read a couple of articles for you. I'm just going to start with two because I have no idea how long these articles are. And I often find myself just reading and then suddenly realizing that I'm way in deep on something that I can't finish. So I'm going to see if I can do these two and then see where we go from there. Here's the new one from Robert Hunsaker from Counterpunch, September 26th. An Unforeseen Climate Beast Awakens. Thank you. I think Boyd sent me this. East Antarctica is a big-time global warming player. Nothing is comparable. It is the world heavyweight, and nothing can impact the world with so much calamitous clout. As such, it would be a huge mistake to discount its capability to turn mean-spirited, striking all of a sudden, catching scientists and humanity unawares. In fact, it's already turning heads, and it alone is equivalent to 170 feet of water. Disturbingly, early signs of destabilization have been detected at Totten Glacier, East Antarctica, where, according to accepted science for years and years, we are not supposed to worry until the next century. Scientists have always said East Antarctica is a not-to-worry region, nearly impervious to the impact of climate change. However, along those lines, over time, it's becoming increasingly evident that one of the horrors of the global warming story is a failure of mainstream science to know what's really going on in a timely fashion, always late to the party. Repercussions could be cascading ecosystems, crushing societal norms and flooding of the great cities well ahead of any kind of preparation, such as building dikes around major urban centers. Here's what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the prototype of mainstream science light, has said regarding the outlook for Antarctica. In 1995, the IPCC projected little change in the extent of the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets over the next 50 to 100 years. The 2001 IPCC report suggests that neither the Greenland nor the Antarctic ice sheets would lose significant mass by 2100. The 2007 IPCC report said there were uncertainties in the full effects of changes in ice sheet flow, and a suggestion that partial loss of ice sheets on polar land could imply meters of sea level rise. Such changes are projected to occur over millennial timescales. The reality is very different. Furthermore, the 2014 IPCC report that Antarctica's contribution to rising sea levels would not exceed several tenths of a meter during the 21st century. Wrong again. The fate of the world's coastlines has become a classic example of how the IPCC, when confronted with conflicting science, tends to go for the least drama position. Yet, extraordinarily, the 2014 IPCC assessment report repeated the mistake and actually produced a numerically smaller figure, despite mounting evidence of polar ice mass loss. Meanwhile, as the IPCC twiddled its thumbs, West Antarctica's meltdowns turned serious, losing 3 massive ice shelves, 1995 to 2002 to 2017, the third loss, massive ice shelves, 1995, 2002, 2017, the third loss, a 1 trillion ton behemoth, forcing National Geographic to redraw the world atlas. Somebody noticed. Now there's this. The Totten Glacier in East Antarctica is destabilizing. It alone carries enough ice melt, 16 feet, to flood New York City and Tokyo. Forget Miami, it's already a goner. Totten is less than 10% of the mass of East Antarctica. Still, Totten brings more potential sea level rise than all of West Antarctica, where major destabilization of glaciers continues ongoing with gusto. According to a recent telling article in Geophysical Research Letters, Yara Mahajirani, Isabella Villacogna, and Eric Renault, mass loss of Totten and Moscow University glaciers, East Antarctica, using regionally optimized GRACE mission MASCONs, July 25th, 2018. Totten lost 18 billion tons of ice every single year from 2002 to 2016, a clear signal that risk of inordinate sea level rise is now officially on the move. Both of these glaciers are vulnerable to the intrusion of warm ocean water and hold considerable potential for sea level rise, said co-author Eric Renault, Donald Bren Professor and Chair of Earth System Science at UCI. This work highlights that East Antarctic glaciers are as important to our future as those in the continent's western regions. To say that is surprisingly bad news is comparable to the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster's surprisingly bad news. Both ecosystem degradations have potential to come down like a ton of bricks on civilized society. For overall perspective, Antarctica is the world's largest desert at 5,400,000 square miles. The United States is 3,500,000 square miles. It is the highest, driest, coldest, windiest, brightest of the 7 continents, roughly the size of the United States and Mexico combined, and almost completely covered by a layer of ice that averages more than 1 mile in thickness and up to 3 miles in some areas. A mile in thickness. The ice has accumulated over millions of years through snowfall. It represents 90% of the ice on Earth and would raise sea levels worldwide by over 200 feet were it to melt. East Antarctica has been quiescent for centuries upon centuries, until now. It is the one piece of the climate puzzle that scientists don't want to see turn ugly so fast, but it is misbehaving very, very badly and sending up smoke signals that humanity best get its act together soon and halt CO2 emissions or buy lots of scuba gear. Not only is the big kahuna, or East Antarctica, starting to shake, rattle, and roll, its kissing cousin, West Antarctica, has already been on a roll for some time now. The mass balance of the Antarctic ice sheet from 1992 to 2017, the journal Nature shows that the rate of ice loss from West Antarctica increasing threefold over the past 15 years. That's a lot. Tripling in 15 years. No science model came close to predicting that rate of increase since 1992, 2002, or 2012, every 10 years, but it was and still is happening at ever increasing rates of speed. Time and again, the same storylines about scientists surprised by how much faster the climate system is changing, way ahead of the models, should start sinking in that anthropogenic climate change is on the march in a big way. Yet, leadership, especially in America, is as cavalier about the risks as General Custer was when informing his courier, "It looks like we caught him sleeping." It is axiomatic that wipeouts are never anticipated. According to James Hansen of Earth Institute, Columbia University, whose strong, ethical, straightforward honesty was totally unacceptable, actually taboo, for the Bush-Cheney administration, the last time that ice sheets disintegrated 14,000 years ago, sea level went up on average 1 meter every 20 years. Oops. Totten is an early warning signal clanging loud and clear. If ignored, it's comparable to Custer's courier riding off in the distance to inform reinforcements of good news. Somebody somewhere, everywhere, better start planning to move to higher ground or building dikes or do something other than sit around waiting for additional, stronger evidence that impending worldwide chaos is right around the corner. Wipeouts are never anticipated. If it were otherwise, they'd never happen. Very good and very true stuff from Robert Hunziker. Thank you. If there is, one extremely obvious signal again, it's the Arctic losing almost all of its ice pretty soon, and it is also the Antarctic about to deliver some very quick sea level rise. I'm sure much quicker than anybody is going to anticipate, much quicker than, 2040 or 2050. We could be looking at something crazy happening in the next 10 or 15 years. And because of that, this is from The Guardian. We're moving to higher ground. America's era of climate mass migration is here. This is from September 24th by Oliver Millman. By the end of the century, sea level rises alone could displace 13 million people. Many states will have to grapple with hordes of residents seeking dry ground. But as one expert says, no state is unaffected by this. After her house flooded for the third year in a row, Elizabeth Bueno was ready to flee. She packed her possessions into dozens of boxes, flooded for the third year in a row, tried not to think about the mold and the mildew, covered furniture, and retreated to a second-floor condo that should be beyond the reach of pounding rains and swelling seas. Bueno is leaving behind a handsome early 20th century house in Charleston, South Carolina. The shutters painted in the city's eponymous shade of deep green. Last year, after Hurricane Irma introduced 8 inches of water into a home Bueno was still patching up from the last flood, local authorities agreed this historic slice of Charleston could be torn down. I was sloshing through the water with my puppy dog. Debris was everywhere, she said. I feel completely sunken. It could cost me around $500,000 to raise the house, demolish the first floor. I'm going to rent a place instead on higher ground. Millions of Americans will confront similarly hard choices as climate change conjures up brutal storms, flooding rains, receding coastlines, and punishing heat. Many are already opting to shift to less perilous areas of the same city or to havens in other states. Whole towns from Alaska to Louisiana are looking to relocate in their entirety to safer ground. The era of climate migration is virtually unheralded, already upon America. The population shift, gathering pace is so sprawling that it may rival anything in U.S. history. Including all climate impacts, it isn't too far-fetched to imagine something twice as large as the Dust Bowl, said Jesse Keenan, climate adaptation expert at Harvard University, referencing the 1930s upheaval in which 2.5 million people moved from the dusty, drought-ridden plains to California. This enormous migration will probably take place over a longer period than the Dust Bowl, but its implications are both profound and opaque. It will plunge the U.S. into an utterly alien reality. It is very difficult to model human behavior under such extreme and historically unprecedented circumstances, Keenan admits. The closest analog could be the Great Migration, a period spanning a large chunk of the 20th century when about 6 million Black people departed the Jim Crow South for cities in the North, Midwest, and West. By the end of the century, sea level rise alone could displace 13 million people, according to one study, including 6 million in Florida. States, including Louisiana, California, New York, and New Jersey, will also have to grapple with hordes of residents seeking dry ground. There's not a state unaffected by this, said demographer Matt Hauer, lead author of the research, which is predicated on a severe 6-foot sea level increase. There are established migration preferences for some places, South Florida to Georgia, New York to Colorado, but in many cases, people would uproot to the closest inland city if they have the means. The Great Migration was out of the South into the industrialized North, whereas this is from every coastal place in the U.S. to every other place in the U.S., said Howard. Not everyone can afford to move, so we could end up with trapped populations that would be in a downward spiral. I have a hard time imagining what the future would be like. Within just a few decades, hundreds of thousands of homes on U.S. coasts will be chronically flooded. By the end of the century, 6 feet of sea level rise would redraw coastline with familiar parts such as southern Florida, chunks of North Carolina and Virginia, much of Boston, all but a sliver of New Orleans missing. Warming temperatures will fuel monstrous hurricanes like the devastating triumvirate of Irma, Maria, and Harvey in 2017, followed by Florence this year, that will scatter survivors in jarring, uncertain ways. The projections are starting to materialize in parts of the U.S., forming the contours of the climate migration to come. I don't see the slightest evidence that anyone is seriously thinking about what to do with the future climate refugee stream, said Orrin Pilkey, professor emeritus at coastal geology at Duke University. It boggles the mind to see crowds of climate refugees arriving in town and looking for work and food. Pilkey's new book, Sea Level Rise Along America's Shores, Slow Tsunami, envisions apocalyptic scenes where millions of people, largely from South Florida, will become a stream of refugees moving to higher ground. They will not be the bedraggled families carrying their few possessions on their backs, as we have seen in countless photos of people fleeing wars and ethnic cleansing, most recently in Myanmar and Syria. Pilkey states in his book, instead there will be well-off Americans driving to a new life in their cars with moving trucks behind, carrying a lifetime of memories and possessions. Dejected with frigid New York winters, Chase Twitchell and her husband purchased a 4-bedroom apartment in Miami Beach in 2011. Good move. With the plan of spending at least a decade basking in the sunshine. At first, keeping a pair of flip-flops on hand to deal with the flooded streets seemed an acceptable quirk, until the magnitude of the encroaching seas became apparent when the city spent $400 million to elevate streets near Twitchell's abode. Twitchell began to notice water pumps were spewing plastic bags, condoms, and chip packets into the bay. Nice. Friends' balconies started getting submerged. Twitchell, a poet, found apocalyptic themes creeping into her work. Last year, she sold the apartment to a French businessman and moved back to upstate New York. Good move. It was like the end of the world stuff, she said. It was crazy for us to have such a big investment in such a dangerous situation. Her neighbors initially scolded her, but now several are also selling up, fretting that the real estate and insurance markets for properties like theirs will seize up soon and very soon. It was horrible but fascinating to see it, Twitchell said. It's like we got to see the future and it wasn't pretty. It's like a movie where there's a terrible volcano that is destroying everything, only it's much slower than that. A sense of fatalism is also starting to grip some local officials. Philip Stoddard, mayor of South Miami, has seen a colleague spooked by sea level rise move to California, and some neighbors sell their houses before an expected slump in prices. Stoddard and his wife regularly discuss buying a fallback property, perhaps in Washington, D.C. Most people will wait for the problem to be bad to take action, but that's what I worry about, he said. We can buy a lot of time, but in the end we lose. The sea level will go over the tops of our buildings. Sanitation is an immediate preoccupation for Stoddard, given the large proportion of residents who aren't served by sewage works. If you're using a septic tank and your toilet starts to overflow into your bathroom because of water inundation, that's a basis of civilization problem. He said a medieval city wasn't a nice smelling place, and they had a lot of diseases. Those living near the coast will face pressures of the gradual sea level rise, as well as dramatic storms, nature, but people inland will also be harried to move by climate change. Farming techniques and technology have improved immeasurably since the Dust Bowl, but rising temperatures are still expected to diminish yields for crops such as maize, soybeans, and wheat, prompting the departure of younger people from farming. By 2050, Texas County, the largest wheat-producing county in Oklahoma, could spend an extra 40 days a year above 90 Fahrenheit compared with now. Excuse me. A study published last year found that economies of the southern states, along with parts of the West, will suffer disproportionately as temperatures rise, and what researchers called potentially one of the largest transfers of wealth in U.S. history. The poorest third of counties are expected to lose up to 20% of their income unless greenhouse gas emissions are severely curtailed. Wealth and potentially people are expected to shift north and west. Even if gas emissions are severely curtailed, carbon dioxide levels will continue to rise. We've already locked in heating and sea level rise. Meanwhile, cities already struggling with heat will see wealthy residents head for cooler climes. Last year, 155 people died in Phoenix due to a particularly fierce summer. Increasing heat will start testing the durability of the populace, even though shielded by air conditioning. In the western states, wildfires are getting larger, raising homes in ever more spectacular ways, and choking thousands of people with carcinogenic smoke. Further to the north, at the border, there are suggestions that people from Central America are being nudged toward the U.S. because of drought and hurricanes in their homelands, part of a trend that will see as many as 300 million climate refugees worldwide by 2050. People will get very grumpy and upset with very hot temperatures, said Amir Jina, an environmental economist at the University of Chicago, who co-authored the research on economic losses. Even if you have air conditioning, some areas start to look less habitable. By the middle of the century, parts of the southwest and southeast won't look attractive to live in. That insidious climate migration is one we should worry about. Big disasters such as hurricanes will be obvious. It's the pressures we don't know or understand that will reshape population in the 21st century. Plotted to name refuges in the U.S., researchers will point to Washington and Oregon in the Pacific Northwest, where temperatures will remain bearable and disasters unlikely to strike. Areas close to the Great Lakes and in New England are also expected to prove increasingly attractive to those looking to move. Let me just interject that the Arctic is warming faster than the middle latitudes, and Washington and Oregon are closer to the Arctic, and Washington and Oregon by degrees are warming faster than other places. So, you know, when you're trying to escape 90 plus temperatures in California, and then you look at the temperatures of places like Portland and Washington, and you realize they're also 90 degrees. I don't know. Those places may be no-goes as quickly as others. By 2065, southern states are expected to lose 8% of their U.S. population share, while the Northeast will increase by 9%. A recent study forecasts that the population in the western half of the U.S. will increase by more than 10% over the next 50 years due to climate migration, largely from the South and Midwest. But these population shifts are uncertain and bound by a tangle of other factors and caveats. People will still largely follow paths guided by nearby family or suitable jobs. Even those who do not want to move may find favored locations too expensive. Some will just grimly hang on. With property rights as strong as they are in the US, some people may choose to go down with the ship, said Harvard's Keenan. The question is whether they have the means and the options to do anything else. People can usually cope with being a little less comfortable, but if you see repeated storms or severe damage to crops, that will trigger change, said Solomon Siang, who researches how climate change will affect society at the University of California. There will be pressure to move a little north. It won't be everyone, though. It won't be like the great migration of wildebeest in Africa. Whole cities picking up and moving would be hugely expensive. Smaller towns are giving relocation a go. However, in 2016, the community of Ile de Jean Charles in Louisiana was the first place to be given federal money to replant itself. The population, situated on an island being eaten away by the sea, is looking to move to a former sugarcane farm 30 miles inland. We are called climate refugees, but I hate that term, said Chantel Comardel, who grew up in the Ile de Jean Charles community. We will be the first ones to face this in the modern U.S., but we won't be the last. It's important for us to get it right so other communities know that they can do it too. About a dozen coastal towns in Alaska are also looking to relocate as diminishing sea ice exposes them to storms and rising temperatures, thaw the very ground beneath them. One Nutok has identified a new site and has some federal funding to begin uprooting itself. A buyout of damaged and at-risk homes has already occurred in New York City's Staten Island in the wake of Hurricane Sandy, while certain flood-prone houses in Houston, pummeled by Hurricane Harvey last year, are also being purchased and raised. But at the cost of doing this for all at-risk Americans would be eye-watering. Estimates range from $200,000 to $1 million per person to undertake a relocation. If 13 million people do have to move, it seems fantastical to imagine 13 trillion, or even a significant fraction of this amount, being spent by governments to ease the way. As a country, we aren't set up to deal with slow-moving disasters like this, so people around the country are on their own, said Joel Clement, a former Department of the Interior official who worked on the relocation of Alaskan towns. In the Arctic, I'm concerned we've left it too late. Younger people have left because they know the places are doomed. These towns won't be relocated within 5 years, and I'm sure there will be a catastrophic storm up there. My hope is no lives will be lost. Ultimately, the U.S. will have to choose what it wants to defend and hopes its ingenuity outstrips the environmental changes ranged against it. Not everyone will be able to shelter behind fortifications like the Big U plan to defend Lower Manhattan. Wrenching decisions will have to be made as to what and where will be sacrificed. We won't see whole areas abandoned, but neighborhoods will get sparse and wild-looking. The tax base will start to crumble, said Stoddard, mayor of South Miami. We don't have the laws to deal with that sort of piecemeal retreat. It's magical thinking to think someone else will buy out your property. We need a plan as to what will be defended, because at the moment the approach is that some kid in a garage will come up with a solution. There isn't going to be a mop and a bucket big enough for this problem. I mean, you have to tell the truth before anything can be done. And it really all starts with the truth. It really all starts with the truth of the severity of the problem. It starts with the truth of the speed and, how quickly this is going to come upon people. And nobody, absolutely nobody, is telling the truth or acknowledging the truth as it stands. And they're still talking about 2100 or 2050. And when, these housing markets collapse, or coastal areas start getting inundated in the space of 10, 15, or 20 years, it's going to be too late. It will be too late. So somebody has to start telling the truth. That's why I'm here. Hopefully other scientists, other journalists, other news outlets get the memo. Hopefully politicians start talking truth about this. Will they do it before it's too late? Signs point to no, but we'll see what happens. That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.